Since 1987, there have been so many Final Fantasy games. We're up to Final Fantasy 16 right now, and each game has its own unique and compelling story in its own right. And in today's video, we're going to rank Final Fantasy 1 through Final Fantasy 16 and determine which game actually has the best story. Now, of course, before we get to that list, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and leave a comment down below. Let me know if you agree with my ranking, or just comment down below what you think games should be ranked higher than others. So let's go. Radio. So in the list today, we're using TierMaker website. It's got a mainline games tier list. Now we're going to shuffle some things around here because this last row is not ranked. And a few reasons why. Because I want to stick with the main games 1 through 16 and not necessarily worry about the spin-offs. Now, that being said, we're going to get rid of Final Fantasy After Years 13 to 11, 10 to 14, and 13-3. Now, I know some of you guys are saying, well, why are you getting rid of 13? Because it's kind of a trilogy. Well, I just want to rank just each game individually and not worry about the MMOs, because I feel like those are more party-driven. You're supposed to play them with friends and make your own stories as you go. Okay, so last on the list is going to be Final Fantasy 1. The reason why? Well, it's a bare bones story of the 4 warriors of light, or the 4 heroes, trying to save the world and restore balance to the world by restoring the crystals and then defeating chaos. It's a very bare bones NES style story, which is totally fine, but you know, it's basic. Radio, next in line, I'm actually not going to go with Final Fantasy 2, but instead I'm going to go with what I think is the direct continuation of Final Fantasy 1 with Final Fantasy 3. Thematically, it's very similar to the original game, and I feel like, again, it's a more direct continuation with the 4 heroes that you can name anything, and it introduced the job system as well, which I really love. But in terms of story, I don't think there was really any major sticking points for me for this one. Okay, now for number 12, we're going to go with Final Fantasy 2. This one, I feel that they started to kind of play around a little bit with story and themes and stuff, and of course the battle system is completely different in terms of leveling, but I really like the exposition of Final Fantasy 2 because you start in a battle that you cannot win. So everybody dies, and then your 4th person is actually rotating until you do actually find the Dark Knight at the very end, and then you determine his real identity, of course. And by the way, there's going to be spoilers for every single game here, so tread carefully if you haven't played some of these games. But Final Fantasy 2, I really like the introduction of the password system as well. It's a bit clunky, and it is very old school feeling, especially if you like those older kind of games, password-based games. But I don't mind Final Fantasy 2. It is kind of the black sheep of the series, though. Radio, number 11 on the list. I might get canceled for this one, and I do apologize in advance, but I'm going to put Final Fantasy 13. I remember when the game came out originally, and I just could not gel with it. And I actually tried it again recently, and I could not gel with it. There's just something about the characters, and I feel like they tried to shoehorn Lightning in as just a moody or brooding individual just for the sake of being so. And I kind of feel like that she's just a girl version of Cloud, really, and it doesn't really work for me. I felt that the story's a little bit convoluted as well. It was kind of hard to follow. Is one of the reasons why I just can't really get super into it. And it's a visually great looking game. It still looks good today, but the story just doesn't hold my attention, unfortunately. Radio, next on the list here for number 10, we're getting a little bit better in terms of story. I'm going to go with Final Fantasy 12. I feel like after Final Fantasy 10, things got a little bit rickety. I don't even know if that's the right word or the most applicable word, but I feel like the stories kind of fell a little bit short in terms of the original 10 games. And the best way I can describe Final Fantasy 12, for those of you who haven't played it, or maybe you have, it's kind of like Star Wars meets Lord of the Rings in a Final Fantasy universe. It's a strange one, and I feel like there's no real true main character with this one, or at least the guy on the box isn't really the main character. I don't know. It's a decent game, but it's just one, again, that, like 13, never really hooked me throughout the years. Radio, for number 9. Now, this is an interesting one because this is a game that I actually really loved as a kid, but as I've gotten older, I found that the story is a little bit jumbled, kind of doesn't really make sense. Thematically, I really enjoy the game, especially now. I just think that there are other games that are better in the series in terms of story, and that's going to be Final Fantasy VIII. I like that it tries to do something different with the junction system, and I know this isn't really, part of the story, but I just like that they tried to do some different stuff. There's some time travel stuff, and then all the main characters used to know each other when they were like in an orphanage, and there's a lot of convolutedness that gets thrown your way towards the end of the game. But I do love the Laguna flashback sequences. I do think Laguna does steal the show in the game, and I really love, being able to play as him. And then of course Squall's connection to Laguna is really cool as well. Okay, for number 8, we are going to go with a game that I think is actually pretty underrated in terms of Final Fantasy stories, and that's Final Fantasy V. Now, this was a game that I only recently played for the first time, and I felt that there was some really cool stuff there because there are parallel worlds, a meteorite crashes, and then you as the main character, Barth, go and find Galuf, who ends up being a king from the other world, and the worlds have been separated or torn into two from the original one, from Exdeath, who's the bad guy and essentially wants to take over the universe. It's a pretty cool and compelling story, and I really enjoyed that game. Final Fantasy V, I think, is one of the more underrated games in the series. Okay, number 7 for me is going to be Final Fantasy IV. Now, this is a game that I will always talk very highly about because I think at this point in the Final Fantasy series, Square really got a handle on themes and character development and story arcs and stuff like that. I think that Final Fantasy IV was a really great turning point in the series for the story, at least, being taken more seriously. I love the character development of Cecil, turning from the Dark Knight to the Paladin and realizing all the wrongdoings that he's done, blowing up the village of summoners to, redeeming everything. And then the cool part is at the very end of Final Fantasy IV it's the only Final Fantasy game where you go to the moon to fight the final boss. I really like that. And of course, Cecil's connection to the main bad guy of the game, Golbez, is actually his brother. There are moon people. I don't know. I really like some of the themes in Final Fantasy IV. It's really cool. And Final Fantasy IV, I think, inspired some later titles, which we'll get to here soon. All right, number 6 is Final Fantasy 15. Now, I know Final Fantasy 15 might not rank super high for some of you who have played it. Actually, I haven't played a lot of the DLC that has come out since the initial release, but I've kind of read into it, of course. Final Fantasy 15 is an interesting one in terms of story for Final Fantasy games. You play as Noctis in a party of other guys, and it's a road trip kind of game, and you just drive through different towns, you interact with different people, but there is that overarching story of you are the heir to the throne, something's happened to your home kingdom, and then you must rectify the situation by getting in touch with your lineage and finding different tombs and getting different powers and essentially harnessing the power of the crystals. And I really love the summons that are in this game, the giant titans. There's a lot that could have been fleshed out a little bit more. But, the 20 or so hours that I spent with the game originally when it came out, I really enjoyed. There's the self-sacrifice that Noctis has to have at the end of the game in order to fulfill his destiny. There's the confrontations with Ardyn that you have along the way as well, because he's, kind of battling against that bloodline for a bunch of different reasons. And of course, you can get into the whole Final Fantasy Versus 13 thing as well. I think that the game did have a lot of troubled development, but overall, I think, themes of friendship, self-sacrifice, and kind of really it is the true version of the friends we make along the way, not necessarily the destination, the journey, not necessarily destination kind of thing. That's why Final Fantasy 15 is number 6 for me, and I think Noctis is a pretty cool character. Okay, number 5, we are going to go with Final Fantasy 9. Final Fantasy IX is a really great game, and I really enjoyed playing that game back in the day, and I love the fact that it is kind of the quintessential Final Fantasy game with all the different callbacks thematically, with job systems and characters. And the most notable character arc for me isn't actually Zidane or Garnet or Stein or anything else. I actually think it's Vivi and the Black Mages as a whole, really dealing with, and maybe kind of in some way, shape, or form, struggling to come to terms with the finiteness of your existence. And this is something, if we want to get really serious, I think about all the time. I'm not meant to be here forever. I don't want to get really deep and philosophical, but trying to do the best you can with the time that you have and coming to terms with the fact that there is an end date. We just don't know when. And that's a very realistic part of Final Fantasy IX, and I really love that story. The ending will always get me as well when Zidane finally meets eyes with Garnet right before the credits. One hell of a tale, pardon the pun, I guess, because Zidane has a tail. And then, of course, you can go into the whole backstory of Zidane and Kuja being the failed version of Zidane and other character developments. I love Steiner as well. He's a really underrated character. There's a lot you can say about Final Fantasy IX. I don't want to blab on about it, but Final Fantasy IX is a really great game. Okay, we got 4 left here. Now, I'm going to surprise some of you guys by saying this, but I actually think that Final Fantasy 16 is my number 4. Now, this is the most recent game in terms of stories for Final Fantasy, but I really enjoyed this one. A lot of you guys can, slam the gameplay. It's not traditional turn-based gameplay. It's press X to win, and I guess that is true if you're, playing on easy mode, but ignoring all that, the story of Clive is insane. It's really good. I love the fact that the game starts out with a flashback sequence of Clive in his younger years, and if you play the demo, that's what you play. And Clive's relationship with his parents, his brother, with Jill as well. They kind of all grew up together, and then stuff happens and they all go their separate ways. Again, spoilers for Final Fantasy 16 if you haven't played this, but I love the character development of Clive. I love the character development of Joshua as well, because he was presumed dead from the beginning of the game when Ifrit and Phoenix fought. You assume that Ifrit killed Phoenix or Joshua, and then all of a sudden Joshua comes to save the day several times and absorbs Ultima into his body and eventually takes over and whatever. But the character development of Clive is insanely good. I love that, and this is something we'll get into here soon. But the voice acting in Final Fantasy 16 really just stole the show for me. I love the performance of Clive. Ben Starr, of course, did Clive, and everybody else as well. Just the emotional attachment that you can get to these characters while they're going through their journey is just next level. The story of Final Fantasy 16, again, is fantastic. As with 9, I could talk about this forever, but it's one of those games that I think is best played if you can. Such a great game, honestly. Radio number 3 for me is going to be Final Fantasy VI. I like this game a lot, and I originally didn't like this game at all. And I talked about this in my Final Fantasy VI video a couple of months ago, why I finally get Final Fantasy VI. I like the fact that there are different character arcs throughout the game, and the characters pretty much intertwine with each other as they go. And each character arc is kind of neatly tidied up towards the end of the game, if you do manage to find everybody in the World of Ruin. But I love the fact, especially in the pre-World of Ruin phase of the game, part 1 or whatever, you meet all these different characters, you learn about their ambitions, and you learn more about the evils of the world, which is Kefka. And then, of course, you have the character development of Terra, who is pretty much the main character of the game, but isn't really the main character of the game, but just the main focus, of course, because of her relationship with the Espers and her background with the Espers, of course, being part human, part Esper as well. That's a very significant portion of the story, and one of the more memorable points of the game when you do realize, like, oh my gosh, she's actually this and not just human, so there's more significance to it. And I also love Kefka pretty much becoming unchecked throughout the game. He is, I think, in my opinion, as much as I love Sephiroth, I think Kefka really is the ultimate Final Fantasy bad guy. I love seeing him just totally unravel from start to finish. And of course, by the time you do meet him, he's achieved everything. He's destroyed the world. He really is the only Final Fantasy bad guy who has done everything that he's gone out to do. And therefore, when you do roll the credits, have you really saved the world? Yes, but at what cost? There's a lot to think about. And I love the way that Final Fantasy VI wraps up. Really great game, great characters, an amazing story as well. Okay, we've got 2 left, and I'm going to shock some of you guys with my number 2, considering I'm such a huge fan of it. But it's actually Final Fantasy VII is going to be my number 2. This is a game that I've loved for many years, and I love the fact that Cloud is not who he thinks he is, and he doesn't know that. And again, massive spoilers here if you haven't played Final Fantasy VII. He's essentially taking on the persona of Zack, being this cool, tough guy, ex-soldier, and making everybody believe everything as he goes along. And I love the exposition, of course, blowing up the reactors, meeting Barrett and Tifa, and the whole story with Aerith as well is really cool. Being an ancient, the last of her own race, and Sephiroth wants to challenge her and thus kills her, and the world almost gets destroyed by the meteor. And I'm trying to look at it from a non-nostalgic point as well, because this is a game that I really loved as a kid, and I'm a huge fan of Final Fantasy VII. I love Remake, and I'm excited for the next installments as well. But I think the entire universe that they set up within Final Fantasy VII is very compelling. I love some of the character development of the characters in the game as well. There's a lot to unpack with Final Fantasy VII, and it's a game that obviously visually hasn't aged very well, which is why they're going and doing the remakes here, which is they're doing the remakes for more than one reason, of course, more than just visuals. But it is a massive cultural phenomenon for a reason, and it's not just visuals. So again, with a lot of these other games that are ranked quite higher, I could ramble on for quite a while, but Final Fantasy VII is my definitive story number 2 in the series. Number 1, you can already tell what it's going to be. Final Fantasy X. This is a game that really well and truly blew me away back in the day. And I think this was because of the voice acting. This was the first fully voiced Final Fantasy game back on the PlayStation 2. I loved the sense of immersion that you had with this game, starting with Tidus in Zanarkand playing a blitzball match, and then everything just goes to heck. And then you see Auron and then Sin coming in and washing everything away, and then you wake up in the middle of nowhere. The amount of desolation and isolation that you feel as Tidus, trying to play the main character as Tidus, is enhanced by the voice acting, similarly to Final Fantasy 16 many years later. But I just love the world of Final Fantasy X. I love the characters of Final Fantasy X. There is quite a diverse cast of characters that really enhance the story. You have Wakka and Yuna, and essentially, there's the pilgrimage that Yuna goes on. Tidus doesn't really know that it ends in self-sacrifice. I love Aeons. I love the introduction of the summons. I love Seymour. I love him as the bad guy because he plays a really great bad guy. You know that he's the bad guy right away because he looks like the bad guy, but the way that his story unravels as you go is really classic Final Fantasy stuff. I really like that. And of course, you have the inner battles with Tidus and his relationship with Jecht, his father. That's a whole other level. And then you realize that Sin is Jecht. The whole ending of it as well, Tidus disappearing, that's something that's even still now, I mean, it's hard to see, but I have chills even thinking about it. Is Tidus a dream? Is he real? I mean, you could think of that for ages, and that's a lot of fan theory stuff that I love to go into every now and again. And we weren't going to talk about it, but the true ending of the secret ending of Final Fantasy X-2, oh my God! You want to make a man cry? That's how you make a man cry. So there you have it. That is my definitive list for Final Fantasy stories. There's not really a bad Final Fantasy game on this list. There are some games that are obviously better than others. Of course, Final Fantasy 1 is the starting point, and I'm ending with Final Fantasy 10 because I still feel like the best Final Fantasy games are 1 through 10, and then sprinkle in Final Fantasy 16 as well as kind of the icing on top, with some of the other ones being a little bit hit or miss if we're looking at everything else other than story. Final Fantasy is a really great series. There's so many great starting points here. If you haven't played a Final Fantasy game, and if you have, I don't know why you're watching this, because you've just had some stuff spoiled for you. I'm very sorry, but I did warn you. But anyway, thank you so much for watching today. Please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And leave a comment down below. Let me know if you agree with my ranking, or do your own ranking in the comments as well. I'm really interested to hear from you guys and see what you guys think of the stories in Final Fantasy. So anyway, thank you so much for watching today. See you again on the next video. Take care.